There are deeds so holy they burn through the veil of reason, and there are deeds so blasphemous they are buried beneath layers of silence, never meant to be remembered by the living. Between these extremes walks the Grey Knights, the Emperor's final covenant, his secret sons forged in psychic fire and sanctified blood. They are the hunters of nightmares, the slayers of demons, the shining edge of purity in a galaxy, drowned in corruption. But what happens when that purity is stained? When the blade that kills the monster begins to resemble it? In the endless shadow of the Imperium, the Grey Knights perform miracles and atrocities alike. They burn worlds to save them. They kill innocents to preserve faith. They bear sins so vast that even their memories are scoured clean to keep the Imperium untainted. Every victory they achieve is bought not with glory, but with silence, shame, and unrecorded sacrifice. Before we begin this descent into forbidden truth, remember, even knowledge of the Grey Knight's existence is heresy. If you wish to walk deeper into the Emperor's darkest design, do so with caution, and faith enough to survive what you'll learn. If this tale of secret wars and divine tragedy draws you in, lend your strength to this chronicle. Like, share, and subscribe, so that the Imperium's hidden stories may endure, even in whispers, across the cold void of the galaxy. The stars were still bleeding from the wounds of the heresy when Titan vanished from all records. No vox echo, no warp signature, no beacon remained. It was as if a moon had been erased from the galaxy's memory, swallowed whole by the Emperor's will. And beneath that veil of silence, beneath the crust of that cold moon, a work began that would scar the soul of mankind forever. Malcador the Sigillite stood alone before a congregation of 9 figures, warriors and psychers alike, each marked by ruin, each carrying the echoes of a war that had devoured gods. The walls around them thrummed with psychic insulation, etched with runes of warding drawn in sanctified blood. It was not the silence of peace that filled the air, but the suffocating hush of forbidden creation. "You are not here to rebuild what was lost," Malcador had told them, his voice thin but resolute, like a man who had already outlived the mercy of hope. "You are here to forge what must never exist again." Outside the chamber, the galaxy convulsed. The Imperium was a wounded beast, half blind, half starved, and still bleeding from the betrayal of its sons. The Emperor sat upon his golden throne, entombed in the light of the Astronomicon, a god in all but flesh. But even a god, Malcador knew, could not banish the warp. It would return and again wearing new faces, speaking through new mouths. To combat such evil, humanity required something beyond loyalty, something beyond faith. It required living weapons, beings who would kill demons not out of devotion, but out of certainty. In the forge chambers of Titan, gene seed was gathered in silence. The samples came from the purest lineage, the untainted fragments of those who had not turned during the heresy. Among them, whispers spoke of the Emperor's own genetic echo, stolen in secrecy by Malcador's hand. Each organ, each cell was treated not as flesh but as relic, anointed in sacred oils and purified through psychic flame. The process took years, decades perhaps. Time held no meaning on Titan, where even the stars seemed to avoid shining. When the first aspirants were chosen, they were not heroes or noble scions of Terra's noble houses. They were orphans of faith, psychers who had survived possession, soldiers who had resisted corruption, men whose souls were fractured but unbroken. Each was subjected to trials that would annihilate lesser beings, isolation within null fields, immersion in holy flame, the consumption of runes inscribed in their own blood. Those who survived were reduced to something neither mortal nor divine. They were the prototypes of perfection, sculpted from fear and devotion alike. And yet beneath all the ritual and sanctity, there was an unspoken truth. The Grey Knights were born not from purity, but from desperation. They were not the Emperor's direct command. They were Malcador's last heresy. For in shaping them, he defied the natural order of creation. He meddled with psychic essence, twisted gene and spirit to mirror the Emperor's impossible ideal. It was a sin that could only be hidden by its necessity. Years passed in silence. The moon became a tomb for the uninitiated, a cradle for the chosen. When at last the first of the Grey Knights stood before Malcador, clad in unpainted ceramite and etched with wards of binding, the regent of Terra felt something close to sorrow. Their eyes glowed faintly with psychic flame. Their voices carried the resonance of a choir that had forgotten its humanity. "Who are we? one of them asked, his voice steady but hollow. Malcador regarded him for a long moment. "You are the Emperor's shadow," he said, his unspoken word. "The blade that cuts where none must see. You are the ones who will fight the war that must never be named." They knelt, their heads bowed in perfect synchrony, their armor whispering like stone grinding against eternity. It was then that the first oath was spoken, not of loyalty to Terra nor to the Imperium, but to silence itself. To fight unseen, to die unremembered. When Malcador departed Titan for the final time, he looked upon the world as if memorizing a sin he could never confess. Some say he spoke a final benediction to the empty stars. Others claim he said nothing at all. When the warp storm swallowed Titan whole, there was no record left, no proof that any of it had ever existed. But deep beneath the ice and rock, the fortress still lived. Engines hummed with sacred power, servo skulls drifted through vast cathedrals of steel, and the grey knights trained in the dark, learning how to kill that which cannot die. Their purity became both weapon and curse. Each victory and training came with a whisper of unease, the realization that they had no place in the Imperium's light. They were born for darkness, for secrecy, for sins no other could bear. They became, in every sense, the Emperor's unspoken confession. The first generation of grey knights trained within the cold womb of Titan, far from the prayers and banners of the Imperium. Here the air was heavy with incense and machine oil. The light filtered through stained glass, depicting not saints, but runes of warding and the Emperor's burning sigil. The fortress monastery was less a home than a labyrinth, a maze of vaults and meditation chambers where thought itself was shaped into a weapon. Every corridor whispered the same truth. Perfection was not a goal but a demand. Their minds were broken down and rebuilt within psychic crucibles. Librarians chanted mantras that twisted perception, forcing the aspirants to stare into the warp without blinking. Those who faltered were reduced to ash by their own reflected fear. Those who endured emerged altered, able to feel the pulse of unreality like the beat of a second heart. They could sense corruption before it took form, smell the metallic sting of a demon's presence before it breached reality. To them, faith was no longer belief, it was chemistry, precision, an act of will so absolute that the warp recoiled from it. But mastery came at a price. Each aspirant underwent the ritual of transfixion, where a fragment of his psychic essence was bound to a sigil inscribed upon his flesh. The pain was indescribable. Their screams became hymns that echoed through the halls of Titan for days. When the process was done, each warrior bore the mark of his own soul, a living seal that made possession nearly impossible, but tethered them forever to the Emperor's psychic radiance. In their dreams they saw him, not as a god upon a throne, but as a blinding force that burned away everything human within them. There were no chaplains among them, no sermons of hope, only silence and the sound of their own breath inside the steel confines of their armor. When they were not training, they meditated within chambers lined with mirrors of black adamantium. There they confronted reflections of themselves warped by the warp, twisted visages whispering temptation, regret, or pride. One by one they learned to destroy these illusions with thought alone. Those who could not were never seen again. Their names, if they had any, were erased from the archives, their existence reduced to another necessary sacrifice in the ledger of purity. Outside, the galaxy forgot them. The Imperium rebuilt its broken worlds, raised statues to dead heroes and carved victory from denial. But on Titan, time stood still. The fortress drifted between the immaterial and the real, phasing in and out of the materium like a ghost anchored by will alone. When demons raged across the stars, the knights felt it in their blood, the tremor of madness echoing through the warp. They knew their time would come soon, and it came with fire. A distress signal reached Titan through channels that should not have existed. Our shrine world near the Eye of Terra had been overrun, its priests possessed, its relics defiled, its skies weeping flame. The Inquisition had already quarantined the system, but the taint was spreading. Normal Astartes would not suffice. Purity could not survive such proximity to damnation. When the first strike cruiser of the Grey Knights launched, its engines burned with blue fire that shimmered through real space like liquid faith. Inside, the warriors stood in formation, silent, statuesque, their armor still unadorned save for the psychic sigils etched upon it. They were untested in battle, yet there was no fear. Each knew that his life was an offering, and that failure would mean the birth of another demon world. The world they descended upon was a ruin of prayer and ash. Churches lay shattered, their stained glass turned to black sand. The sky was torn open, a bleeding wound through which things moved, unseen but felt. The ground itself whispered blasphemy. The Grey Knights advanced through this hellscape in silence, bolters loaded with sanctified rounds, wards burning faintly on their armor. Where they walked, the warp recoiled. The first demon came in the form of light, a pillar of brilliance that spoke in the voices of angels. The knights did not falter. They raised their storm bolters and fired as one. Silver bolts tore through the illusion, revealing the creature beneath. A twisting mockery of wings and mouths, its laughter like molten glass. Their Justicar stepped forward, drawing his nemesis blade. A weapon forged to slice through the immaterial, its edge singing with psychic resonance. With one swing he cleaved the demon in half, its body dissolving into screaming vapor. But victory was not triumph. The air was thick with sin. Every corpse, every echo of prayer had become fuel for corruption. The knights pressed on, purging, cleansing, burning. They slaughtered not only demons, but the possessed faithful, men and women who begged for mercy in voices not their own. Each death was a wound upon the soul, but no tears fell. Their oaths forbade it. Compassion was corruption. By the time dawn rose over that desecrated world, nothing remained alive. The planet was silent, holy once more through annihilation. As the Grey Knights departed, the Justicar turned to his brothers. His voice, filtered through the Vox grill, was calm but hollow. "We have done what must be done," he said, yet in his eyes, up behind the layers of psychic wards and sanctified steel, there flickered something human, doubt, the smallest spark of the sin they had been created to destroy. Titan awaited their return. The fortress would record nothing of their mission. No name, no commendation, no mark upon any scroll of honor, only silence. And in that silence the seeds of the next sin began to grow. The silence that followed their return to Titan was not peace, it was judgment. The fortress monastery had no need for applause or reward. The Grey Knights did not celebrate survival. They examined it. They dissected every breath, every thought, every flicker of emotion that might have lingered in the wake of the slaughter. Purity was not simply tested, it was reforged after every battle, hammered and purified until nothing remained but obedience. Within the Hall of Echoes, a place forbidden to all but the most psychically attuned, the Justicar stood before the librarian purifier. The chamber was lit only by the pale shimmer of runes suspended in the air, wards alive with faint whispers. The librarian's face was pale, his eyes veiled in a blue psychic glow as he scanned the aura of his brother. For hours he spoke no word, his mind brushing against every memory the Justicar carried from the demon world. When at last he lowered his staff, his verdict came in a voice that quivered like cold iron. "The mission is complete," he said, "but your heart trembles still." The Justicar did not deny it. To feel was human, and humanity here was a weakness to be excised. "I will burn it out," he replied. "Then you may serve again," and so it was. Emotion was purged as rigorously as infection. The Grey Knights prayed not for forgiveness but for erasure, to become pure instruments devoid of fear or pity. Each knight was both penitent and priest, his own confessor and executioner. To the Imperium they were myths. To themselves they were burdens given form. Years passed, or perhaps centuries. Time was devoured by the void. Titan remained unseen, its orbit hidden within the mists of the warp, and yet untouched by its corruption. Rumors began to whisper among the Order Malleus that an order of demon slayers existed, blessed directly by the Emperor himself. These whispers were tolerated, even encouraged, for they kept the true horror of the warp shrouded in faith. But no one outside the Inquisition ever truly knew. It was in this silence that the Grey Knights confronted their second creation, one born not of necessity, but of paranoia. The Emperor's design was perfect, they were told. Yet perfection decays when left unchecked. The senior among them, now called Grand Masters, devised new rituals to ensure no taint could ever root itself within their ranks. They created the Rite of Resonance, an ordeal in which each knight's soul was tested against the psychic harmony of the Emperor's will. To fail was to be unmade, To pass was to ascend beyond individuality, to become a vessel of divine wrath. The ritual required sacrifice. One among them would act as conduit, channeling the raw, psychic essence of the others. That conduit would always perish, consumed by sanctified flame. And yet the rite continued, decade after decade, consuming the purest among the pure. They said it was necessary. They said it was holy. In truth, it was a sin. For every time the ritual was enacted, something was taken from them. Not just the life of the conduit, but fragments of the others' souls. The harmony grew thinner, more fragile, until even their dreams trembled with the sound of distant screams. Still they endured. Still they fought, crossing the galaxy in silence to wage wars no Imperial record would ever acknowledge. On the demon world of Electo, they fought beside a contingent of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. The Grey Knights cleansed the world, purged the warp breach, and saved the surviving sisters from possession. But when the last demon fell, the Inquisition decreed that none who had witnessed the Knight's true nature could live. The sisters, holy warriors of the Emperor, were executed in silence. Their bodies were burned, their names stricken from record. The Knights obeyed without hesitation. Their storm bolters barked hymns of mercy. Their blades sang psalms of execution. But as their ships ascended from Electo's ashes, an echo lingered within the warp, faint, sorrowful, like a prayer unanswered. It was said that the Emperor heard all things. If so, he remained silent. Within Titan's deepest sanctum, beneath vaults layered with sigils older than humanity, the Grand Masters gathered. They knelt before the hololithic effigy of their founder, Malcador the Sigillite, an echo preserved in psychic crystal. Though centuries dead, his image still watched over them, his voice replayed in times of uncertainty. "You must bear the sins of mankind," the voice whispered, distorted but resolute, "even if it means becoming the very thing you were made to destroy." And so they did. Again and again, their silver armor gleamed with sanctified light, but within their eyes the fire had grown colder. They no longer spoke of salvation or redemption. They spoke only of duty and the necessity of silence. The Grey Knights had been born from heresy disguised as faith, and in their endless service, they began to realize that perhaps all purity was only a mask for survival. The fortress stirred once more, its engines waking from hibernation. Another world had fallen, another breach had opened. The Grey Knights armed themselves in silence, reciting prayers they no longer believed, each word a chain that bound them tighter to the Emperor's will. When they departed Titan this time, the stars themselves seemed to dim. The strike cruiser cut through the void like a blade through sanctified flesh. No banners hung from its hull, no heraldry marked its passage. It bore no name, only a cipher, an unspoken oath sealed in blood and fire. Within its armored belly, the Grey Knights prepared for war with the same ritual precision they had known for millennia. The armory echoed with the click of locking runes and the low, mechanical growl of power systems awakening. Silvered armor, etched with wards older than most Imperial worlds, sealed over flesh. Every plate was a prayer, every rune a curse against the abyss. Their weapons were not forged for victory, they were forged for annihilation. Among them walked the chaplain, his skull-helmed visage impassive. In one hand he carried the Liber Daemonica, the sacred tome each knight swore to in silence. In the other, his Crozius hummed with a psychic resonance that vibrated in the very marrow of those who heard it. He did not give speeches. He did not inspire. He simply recited the rites of oblivion. Memory is a blade, it cuts. Let it carve away doubt. Let nothing remain. The destination was a shrine world, once holy, now a wound festering in real space. A warp breach had torn through its cathedrals, vomiting forth demons in obscene mockeries of devotion. Where choirs once sang hymns, now flayed bodies howled. And yet the Inquisition had given the order not to cleanse, but to erase. The knights descended like falling stars. No warning, no mercy. Their storm bolters thundered, psy-cannon shells burning through heretic and demon alike. The ground split beneath the psychic force of their charge. Choirs of the damned screamed as their forms were cast back into the void, bodies dissolving in flares of argent flame. But this was no ordinary cleansing. Among the tide of corruption, an Imperial regiment still fought, a battered line of mortal soldiers clinging to hope. They raised their eyes as the silver warriors appeared, believing salvation had come. They were wrong. The inquisitorial edict was absolute. No witnesses. The Grand Master gave no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. Cleanse everything. The soldiers' joy died first. Then their bodies followed. The Grey Knights advanced, and with each pull of the trigger, another Imperial loyalist was silenced. It was not hatred. It was not cruelty. It was necessity, cold, immaculate, unquestioned. To reveal the Grey Knight's existence to the wider Imperium was to invite disaster, to risk knowledge that could unravel everything. So even the innocent were marked for death. One young soldier fell to his knees as a halberd hovered above his throat, eyes wide with a child's belief in the Emperor's mercy. The Justicar did not meet his gaze. Mercy was not theirs to give. The blade came down in silence, and as the last mortal life faded, the warp breach itself roared like a wounded god. A figure emerged from the tear, a prince of Slaanesh, radiant and vile, its form shifting between beauty and monstrosity. Its voice was a hymn of temptation, echoing through the air like silk dragged over bone. "Look upon yourselves, silver sons," it purred. "You call me damned, yet your hands drip with the same blood." The Grand Master raised his blade, but the demon's smile only widened. "You are not hunters," it whispered. "You are butchers who call themselves pure." The battlefield stilled, if only for a heartbeat. The demon was not wrong. The Grey Knights surged forward, their psychic chorus colliding with the creature's song. The world itself shook beneath the weight of their clash, divine will against profane ecstasy. Firestorms bloomed like black flowers. The sky split. Stone cathedrals crumbled into ash. When it ended, the demon was gone, its body turned to smoke and void light. The shrine world was silent once more, ruined, bled dry, erased. The knights stood amidst the corpses of friend and foe alike. None spoke, none prayed. Above, the strike cruiser descended, and as its hatches opened, the cleansing fires followed. Every body, every record, every trace of the battle was incinerated. History itself was rewritten in ash. As the cruiser rose back into the void, the Justicar turned once, looking down upon the burning world. Not with sorrow, not with pride, only with the weight of a silence so heavy it felt eternal. The Grey Knights did not sin as mortals did. Their sins were carved into the bones of the Imperium itself. The void was silent, save for the whisper of the Astronomican's distant pulse and the soft murmur of the ship's ancient engines. Within the sanctum of the strike cruiser, the Grey Knights stood motionless in meditation. Their armor, once radiant, was now darkened by the residue of battle. Fine ash embedded in the holy runes, the scent of burnt ozone still clinging to the ceramite. Yet no warrior bowed under the weight of what had transpired. Guilt was a human thing, and they were not meant to be human anymore. Still, something lingered. The Grand Master walked alone through the relic hall, past the banners of fallen brothers, whose names were sung only in silence. His footsteps echoed softly across the marble, each sound swallowed by the hum of the Geller field. In his gauntleted hands, he held the shattered fragment of a purity seal scorched black by demon fire. It was all that remained of one who had stood beside him for 2 centuries. He paused before a mural, an ancient fresco depicting the first of their kind kneeling before the Emperor himself. The paint was cracked, its golden pigment dimmed with age. Yet the eyes of the Emperor, even faded, seemed to follow him. And for the first time in an eternity of obedience, he wondered whether those eyes still saw at all. When the librarian entered, his armor flickered with residual psychic light. His voice was low, restrained by ritual calm. "The prognosticars have seen shadows moving in the warp. The echoes of what we faced linger still." The Grand Master nodded slowly. "It always lingers." They said no more for a long while. The silence stretched between them like a prayer left unanswered. Then the librarian added, "There is disquiet among the younger knights. Some question why the innocent had to burn. I have silenced such thoughts for now." The Grand Master's gaze remained fixed upon the mural. Silence does not erase doubt. It buries it. And buried doubt grows teeth. The librarian tilted his head. "Then what would you have me tell them, my lord?" A pause. The hum of the ship seemed to deepen, as if the vessel itself waited for the answer. "Tell them the truth," the Grand Master said, "that our order exists to sin so that others may remain pure, that we are the blade that cuts both the demon and the dreamer who sees it, that we do not fight for glory or for light, but for the void that must swallow all things unworthy of him." He turned then, eyes hidden behind his helm's argent glare. And if they cannot bear that truth, then let them pray for amnesia. Elsewhere within the vessel, the surviving Justicar sat alone before a dim, votive flame. The deck beneath him thrummed with the slow heartbeat of the machine spirit. His armor had been cleansed, sanctified anew, but his hands, unhelmeted now, still trembled. He remembered the young soldier's eyes. He had told himself it was mercy, that the boy would have died screaming had he been left to the warp. But the memory gnawed at him, quiet and relentless. He whispered the canticle of absolution again and again until his throat burned, but the words carried no weight. They hung in the air like ash that refused to settle. Then a whisper brushed against his mind, faint, almost kind. Not demon, not warp, but something older. A voice without origin, carried on psychic wind. Do you think yourselves untouchable? The Justicar froze. The sanctum's lights flickered one after another, until only the votive flame remained. Even the purest silver tarnishes when bathed in blood. The voice was gone as suddenly as it had come, leaving only the echo of his own heartbeat. He rose slowly, sealing his helm once more. His psychic wards pulsed with defensive light, but the air remained still, untouched by warp presence. And yet, the doubt remained, curling like smoke within the corners of his mind. He walked toward the chapel where the rest of the Brotherhood gathered for the rite of reflection. 1,000 voices spoke in unison, an ocean of psalms recited through vox augments, each syllable resonating with psychic power. Their faith could level cities. It could seal rifts, but could it silence the echo of a single soul's doubt? As the chant built to its crescendo, the Grand Master raised his halberd, and a column of argent light engulfed the chamber. The psychic resonance struck like thunder. For a heartbeat, every knight felt the presence of the Emperor, distant, immense, incomprehensible. It was not love, it was command, and within that burning command a whisper of something else, cold and ancient, moved. They had always believed they were beyond the touch of corruption, that their very creation was a miracle, unmarred by the weaknesses of humanity. But the warp was patient, and even miracles cast shadows. The light dimmed, the rite ended, silence returned. No one spoke of the whisper, no one dared. But deep within the librarium, the prognosticar's astropathic records began to fracture, their runes splintering into unreadable patterns. Something unseen watched from beyond the veil, tracing their faith with invisible fingers. The sins of the Grey Knights were not merely acts of necessity, they were becoming seeds of consequence. And far across the galaxy, in the black vaults beneath Titan, an ancient ward flickered for the first time in 10,000 years. It began as a whisper, not the kind that rides the air, but the kind that blooms behind the eyes, a soft vibration just beneath the surface of thought. At first it was dismissed as the echo of the warp, the remnant hum of recent battle. But whispers have patience, and this one did not fade. Brother Captain Alaric knelt before the chapel of St. Anval, his halberd planted firmly in the stone. The votive lights flickered across the argent surface of his armor, refracting against purity seals that had been replaced so many times they were more patchwork than prayer. He had fought demons on worlds where the air itself screamed. He had seen planets erased by holy fire. Yet this silence unnerved him more than any battlefield. The whisper returned, low and calm. Do you remember what you were before the vow? His eyes snapped open. He rose to his feet, scanning the sanctum. The chapel was empty, its air still heavy with incense and ozone. No sound but the faint hum of the ship's spirit core. His armor's autosenses detected no presence, no psychic breach. Still he felt watched. He removed his helm, letting the cold air of the sanctum bite against scarred flesh. The voice had not come from the warp, of that he was certain. It felt cleaner, more resonant, like the echo of a truth long buried beneath ritual. He turned his gaze toward the relic altar, an obsidian dais upon which rested the shattered hilt of a nemesis blade, said to have belonged to the first Grand Master. The blade's edge had been broken in battle against a prince of Slanesh, and it was said that the wound upon reality, left by that duel, still bled faintly in the immaterium. The whisper came again. You think purity absolves you, but purity without purpose is vanity. A surge of static filled his voxlink, forcing him to his knees. His vision blurred. For a heartbeat, the chapel was gone, replaced by a vision of gold and ruin. A figure loomed before him, immense, radiant, crowned by a halo of burning light. The Emperor upon his throne, But the throne was not golden. It was bone, and from beneath its seat rivers of blood flowed into the dark. Alaric's breath caught. He tried to speak the rite of denial, but the words tangled in his throat. The vision shattered, leaving him gasping, kneeling before the altar once more. The votive flames were extinguished. Only smoke remained. He staggered to his feet, activating his vox. "Librarius, this is Brother Captain Alaric. I require a psychic scan of Chapel 16. Possible residual warp interference, no response. Only static." He repeated the call. Silence. He turned toward the exit and froze. The doorway was gone. In its place stood a wall of solid iron etched with unfamiliar sigils. The air had changed. The ship's hum was gone. The silence was absolute. Then came the footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. A figure emerged from the darkness. A grey knight, his armor tarnished and cracked, his face hidden beneath a helm whose visor glowed faintly with inner fire. The mark upon his pauldron was old, almost erased. Alaric stepped forward cautiously. "Identify yourself." The figure did not reply. "By the Emperor's command, name your rank and order." At last the figure spoke, and when it did, the voice was his own. "You swore an oath to cleanse the galaxy of corruption. Yet you never asked who cleansed you." The chamber trembled. Alaric's mind reeled as the truth struck him. The figure before him was him, but not as he was now. The armor was ancient, the insignia that of a grey knight long dead. He tried to strike, but his halberd passed through the apparition as if through mist. "Every demon you banish takes something with it," the apparition whispered. "A memory, a word, a sliver of what made you you. How much remains, Captain? How much of your soul did you trade for certainty?" The walls of the sanctum rippled. The iron bled. Voices filled the air, 1,000 prayers recited backwards. Alaric screamed a word of banishment, psychic fire erupting from his armor's seals. The vision cracked apart, shattering into white noise, and then silence again. He stood alone once more in the chapel, heart pounding, armor steaming from residual energy. The votive lights reignited one by one. The altar was untouched. The door stood where it had always been, only the relic blade was different. Where once it had lain broken, it now gleamed, whole, flawless, and humming with a low psychic resonance. Alaric stared, dread coiling within his gut. The weapon's runes glowed faintly, and among the litanies of purity, one symbol he did not recognize pulsed with quiet defiance. A mark that no grey knight should ever bear. It was the 8-pointed star. He stumbled backward, disbelief clawing at his thoughts. Impossible. No demon could have entered Titan's sanctum. No relic could be corrupted without the librarius sensing it. Yet here it was, and it was singing. The whisper returned, quieter now, almost gentle. "There are sins even the Emperor cannot forgive." When Brother Captain Alaric returned to the Hall of Oaths, his armor was still faintly luminous from the psychic discharge that had scorched through his wards. The servitors that tended the chamber paused in their mechanical devotions as he passed, their augmetic eyes tracking the faint residue of energy that shimmered around him. None spoke. They never did. But even their silence seemed heavier, as if the machine spirits themselves had sensed what he carried within. The Grand Master waited by the dais, surrounded by the other senior brothers. The light from the sanctum's great reliquary shone down through fractured stained glass, painting the chamber in alternating hues of crimson and steel. He turned when Alaric approached, the lines of his armor gleaming with runic light. "You were summoned for communion, not penance," the Grand Master said. "Why do you bear the mark of psychic strain?" Alaric bowed his head, his voice steady but low. "I have seen something. A vision, or perhaps a test. The relic of the first blade. It changed before my eyes. Whole again. And upon its edge," he hesitated, his throat tightening, "there was a mark that should not exist." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The librarian who had spoken with the Grand Master before stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You speak of corruption? Of chaos on Titan? I know what I saw." The Grand Master's tone was quiet, but it struck like a hammer. "And yet no such presence registers upon our wards. The librarium shows no disturbance. The prognosticars sense no shadow." "Then it hides from them," Alaric said. "Or worse, it comes from within." The silence that followed was almost holy in its weight. The Grand Master regarded him for a long moment, then gestured toward the altar. Bring the relic. Alaric turned to obey, but when the servo guards opened the containment field, the relic was once again broken. The fracture lines the same, the edges dulled with centuries of disuse, no trace of the eight-pointed star. The Grand Master's expression did not change, but his voice carried the faint edge of controlled fury. "Do you accuse the Emperor's chosen of deceit, brother captain?" Alaric's jaw tightened. "I accuse nothing, I report. But something is wrong. You all feel it. You've felt it since the crusade on Trinitas IV." The librarian's eyes flashed with psychic light. "Trinitas is sealed to record. None may speak of it." "Perhaps that is the sin," Alaric said softly. The psychic pressure that followed nearly drove him to his knees. It was not a blast of energy, but the collective will of those around him, a weight of absolute discipline pressing his thoughts into silence. When the pressure lifted, the Grand Master spoke again. "You will undergo mind scrutiny and ritual isolation, for your sake and for ours. If there is corruption, it will be found. If there is madness, it will be healed." Alaric nodded slowly, though the word healed sounded more like erased. He was escorted to the vaults beneath the librarium, a labyrinth of obsidian corridors lit by cold lumen strips. The hum of psychic containment fields filled the air, a low chorus of electronic hymns. He was stripped of his halberd, of his armor's purity seals, of the data slate that carried his campaign records. Even his name was encoded behind wards, replaced by a designation. In the isolation cell, he was left with nothing but the whisper of his own breath. And then, the voice came again. "You sought truth in silence, but silence belongs to the dead." The lumen flickered. The warding runes along the walls dimmed one by one. Alaric closed his eyes, forcing his mind into the defensive patterns taught to all knights since initiation. But this voice did not breach his wards, it was inside them. You do not serve him. You serve what he became." A vision tore through his mind, the Emperor's throne, vast and hollow, surrounded by angels of metal and bone. The Grey Knights knelt before it, chanting the litany of purity. But as they rose, their faces were gone. Every helm mirrored his own. He saw the galaxy burning. Worlds scoured clean not by demons, but by those who claimed to destroy them. He saw his own blade cutting through innocence again and again, each strike justified by doctrine. And over it all, that whisper. Not mockery, not temptation, but sorrow. You were meant to be his redemption. Instead, you are his echo. When the vision faded, Alaric found himself kneeling on the cold floor, his hands trembling. The runes along the wall flickered back to life, their glow steady, unbroken, as if nothing had happened. Outside his cell, the librarian watched through the Auspex feed, his face unreadable. "Subject displays elevated synaptic activity," he said to the attendant scribe, "but no signs of external possession. His mind remains intact." The scribe hesitated. "Then what caused the surge?" The librarian looked once more at the trembling figure within the cell. "Faith," he said quietly, "or something that once resembled it." The first fracture appeared in the librarian's psychic archives. A single rune glowing faintly upon the surface of a crystal datasphere pulsed once, and then split into two. No machine registered it, no scribe saw it, but the ripple spread silently through the vaults beneath Titan, threading its way through wards older than empires. By the time the prognosticars noticed, it was already too late. Across the fortress monastery, subtle disturbances began to manifest. Candles guttered in chambers where there was no wind. Serve-altars repeated the wrong prayers. Sigils of warding reversed themselves mid-ritual. And within the meditation halls, Grey Knights began to dream. That was the first sign something had gone terribly wrong. For millennia, their gene-crafted minds had been engineered to sleep without dreams. Their rest was pure, without memory or madness. But now, one by one, they began to wake screaming from visions they could not recall. Their psychic barriers slick with sweat, their purity litanies faltering. The librarian presiding over their conditioning, Epimetheus, recorded the phenomenon in terse notes that grew less confident as the nights passed. Day 1, residual warp interference suspected. Subjects maintain composure. Day 3, 14 knights report identical phrases whispered during trance. Phrases untranslatable, but rhythmic. Day 5, 43. Knights experience the same auditory hallucination, a voice reciting the litany of absolution backwards. Day 7. Disturbances spreading to machine spirits. Cogitators emitting static patterns forming the Emperor's name inverted. By the 8th day, the silence of Titan was gone. The hum of the fortress's wards was now underscored by a low, discordant resonance, like a choir breathing out of sync. The librarians gathered in the sanctum of psychic communion, linking their minds in an attempt to isolate the source. What they found instead was themselves. Each mind mirrored another. The same thought repeated through 1,000 variations. Doubt, guilt, the faint echo of something they refused to name. When they tried to sever the connection, the link deepened, pulling them inward, and then they heard the voice. "You swore your oaths upon my name. But tell me, which name did you mean?" Every light in the chamber went out. Brother Librarian Epimetheus fell to his knees, clutching his helm as psychic feedback screamed through his wards. Around him, the others convulsed as though struck by invisible flame. He saw flashes, fragments of memory that were not his own. Worlds burned in holy fire. Children turned to ash beneath orbital bombardment. Cities silenced for fear of heresy that never existed. They were not visions of chaos. They were visions of obedience. When the lights returned, 6 librarians were dead, their armor blackened from within, their eyes seared into white blindness. Epimetheus alone remained conscious, kneeling amid the smoke, whispering the Emperor's name over and over, but the name no longer sounded right. He rose shakily and staggered toward the control dais, his trembling hands activating the Vox relay. The message he sent to the Grand Master was brief, fragmented by psychic distortion. It's spreading. Not corruption, reflection. Something beneath our faith. As the transmission cut out, moments later the alarms began to toll, not the shrill cry of invasion, nor the rhythmic peal of ritual. This was older, a tone reserved for one thing only: containment breach. Within the lower vaults, containment seals flickered and died. The relics of 10,000 crusades, each one saturated with psychic residue, awoke from their long slumber. Chains of sanctified steel trembled as unseen pressure pressed outward. Brother Captain Alaric, still confined in isolation, heard the alarms through the layered stone. He lifted his head, his eyes cold with realization. "It was never about me," he whispered. The lumen above his cell exploded in a shower of sparks. The runes across the wall dimmed, then reformed into words not written by any human hand. "You remember Trinitas?" "So do we." He felt the temperature drop. The air grew thick with the scent of burning oil and something older, the metallic tang of tears never shed. Across Titan, other knights froze mid-prayer, their voices faltering as a chorus not their own filled the silence. Their armor resonated with a low hum, each suit echoing a fragment of the same voice. The fortress trembled as the collective thought of an entire brotherhood collided with its own reflection, and for the first time in the history of the Grey Knights, faith itself began to fracture. The fortress moon of Titan no longer hummed with devotion. It shuddered. From orbit the bastion appeared whole, a silver fortress adrift in the void. But within, the psychic wards flickered like dying embers. The chanting of thousands of Grey Knights had fallen into dissonance, their faith no longer harmonic. The Emperor's name was whispered, not proclaimed. In the Grand Master's sanctum, a council convened for the first time in a millennium. Candles burned low beneath towering statues of the Primarchs, and every shadow seemed alive with judgment. Grand Master Kaldor Drago stood at the head of the chamber, his armor scorched from the ritual purges he had ordered across the lower vaults. The silence around him was heavy, not with reverence but with dread. "The Librarium reports psychic infection," intoned Castellan Varan, "but there are no warp entities detected." "The corruption bears no signature." "Then it is no corruption," Drago replied. "It is revelation." His words drew sharp glances. "Even among the Grey Knights, beings forged for absolute faith, the suggestion bordered on blasphemy. Epimetheus was brought before them, pale and trembling, his psychic hood fused with scorch marks. His voice was hollow, like someone speaking from inside a dream. We searched for the voice's source, but it came from within. From our wards, our relics, our prayers. It knew every word before we spoke it. "A mimic?" Varan demanded. "A mirror," Epimetheus corrected. "It reflected our faith, and found it wanting. Drago dismissed the council with a gesture, leaving only Epimetheus. When the chamber was empty, he approached the central plinth where a golden seal bearing the sigil of the Inquisition gleamed beneath layers of dust. "You were there?" Drago murmured. "During the founding." "I was a novice then," said Epimetheus, his voice cracking. "But I remember what they did, what they used." The Grand Master's gauntlet tightened. "Say it." "The gene seed that birthed us," the librarian whispered, "was not pure. It came from the Emperor's most trusted son, and his most damned." Silence fell like a blade. Every knight knew fragments of the myth, that their creation was born from sacrifice, that purity had a price. But none spoke of the full truth, that the seed of the Grey Knights was refined from the bloodlines of the Emperor and Horus alike. A deliberate intertwining of divine light and absolute ruin. Purified through pain, sealed by witchfire. To wield perfect resistance to chaos, they had to be part of it. The room seemed to darken as the truth bled into the air. Epimetheus bowed his head. "We have been chanting our own sin for 10,000 years. Every exorcism, every ward, every burn mark upon the heretic's flesh, all of it echoes the act that created us. The warp is not invading us, Grandmaster. It is remembering." Drago turned toward the great mural of the Emperor behind the dais, his radiant figure etched in gold, hand outstretched in benediction. The mural trembled, dust falling like grey snow. For an instant, Drago saw another image superimposed, the Emperor not as savior, but as executioner. His hand not blessing, but binding. "Then our faith," Drago said softly, "was built upon the foundation of a lie." Epimetheus smiled. "A hollow, broken thing. Not a lie, my lord. A necessary sin." The ground shook violently. Sirens wailed as psychic tremors erupted across the fortress. Wards cracked. Vault doors buckled. From the depths of Titan, a blinding column of light burst upward, punching through kilometers of stone and ceramite. The psychic shockwave rippled across the planet's crust, shattering the skies with auroras of blood-red lightning. Drago turned as a chorus of screams echoed through the Vox network, not of agony, but of awakening. "What is it?" he demanded. Epimetheus, eyes glazed with tears, whispered, "The past. It's answering." From the heart of the catacombs, an ancient vault long sealed under Imperial decree began to open, its locks melting as if undone by the will of the warp itself. Inside lay relics older than the Imperium, and within them the first Grey Knights, those who had been bound in stasis since the founding. Their armor was immaculate. Their eyes glowed with golden fire, but their presence carried the stench of the warp. One of them stepped forward, his voice echoing like thunder through the psychic link. "We are the proof of your sin. The Emperor forgave none of us. Why should he forgive you?" Titan trembled again. The fortress groaned under the weight of its own sanctity collapsing. Drago drew his blade, the Titan sword, as the vaulted chamber split apart above him. "Then let the Emperor judge us both," he whispered. And in that moment, faith and heresy became indistinguishable, silver and shadow merging as the fortress of purity prepared to drown in its own light. Titan was dying. The storm above the fortress moon had become a wound in reality, a spiraling vortex of burning ether where lightning moved backward, unmaking light itself. The Astronomican's faint gleam, so distant it should have been invisible, flickered for the first time in 10,000 years. In the vaults below, sacred relics screamed as their psychic bindings snapped one by one. Grand Master Kaldor Drago stood upon the shattered bridge of the Sanctum Ardent, the ruins of his order trembling beneath him. Vox channels erupted with static and prayer, desperation bleeding into liturgy. The once perfect cadence of Grey Knight incantations now carried notes of doubt, pain, and human fear. "Titan will not hold," came the voice of Castellan Varen through the broken Vox. "The wards are feeding the breach instead of closing it." Drago looked down at the burning plains below, where silver-armored warriors, paragons of purity, were locked in battle not with demons, but with each other. Some had fallen to madness, their faith inverted by the psychic storm. Others fought to contain them, weeping as they struck down their brothers. The sanctity of Titan had become its own battleground. He turned toward the dying librarian, Epimetheus, who knelt at the base of the throne altar, blood leaking from beneath his helm. The runes of his armor pulsed erratically, as though his soul were trying to tear itself free. "The first of us have awakened," Epimetheus whispered. "They seek redemption in destruction. And if they find it?" Drago asked. "Then all that we are was for nothing." Drago's gaze drifted to the horizon. The fractured reflection of the warp storm mirrored in the glacial seas. He could feel it now, the echo of their founding sin calling for judgment. The Emperor's silence pressed against his mind like a weight. For centuries, he had believed that silence to be approval. Now it felt like abandonment. He walked toward the broken altar, where a single relic remained untouched, a cracked purity seal inscribed with a single phrase, "No soul is without cost." It was the Emperor's handwriting. For a long moment, Drago simply stared at it. Then he knelt. "My lord," he murmured, "we have fought in your name beyond the reach of time. We have slain your enemies and burned your own creations. If this is judgment, then let it be upon me." The air shifted. A voice that was not a voice filled the chamber, echoing through the psychic haze. "Would you offer yourself, son of my failure?" Drago's eyes widened. He could not tell if it was the Emperor, the warp, or the remnants of his own conscience speaking, but it did not matter. The truth was irrelevant. Faith demanded sacrifice. He rose and turned to Epimetheus. "Prepare the invocation. We will seal Titan." Epimetheus coughed blood, eyes hollow but resolute. "It will kill us all. Then we die pure." Across the moon, every surviving grey knight heard the command through the psychic link. Even those who had fallen into madness hesitated, sensing the will of their Grand Master, overriding the chaos that consumed them. Together they began the final canticle, a rite never meant to be spoken aloud, a weapon forged from their own essence. As their voices joined, the planet itself began to burn with silver light. Statues crumbled. Chapels disintegrated into dust. The psychic storm buckled inward, drawn toward the source of the song. Drago raised the Titan sword high, its blade gleaming brighter than the stars. The ancient figures, the first Grey Knights, advanced from the breach, their golden eyes blazing with divine fury. "You cannot erase sin with faith," one of them thundered. "To know," Drago said, "but faith can atone for it." He plunged the sword into the heart of the altar. A blinding eruption consumed everything. The fortress, the storm, the ancient warriors, all were devoured by light so intense it folded upon itself. For an instant, Titan was gone from the materium, its surface erased, its orbit empty. Then, as the warp storm collapsed, silence returned. Only drifting dust remained. But within that silence, across the void between stars, the Astronomicon flared once more, its beam burning steadier, brighter than before. Some claimed they saw a shape within that light, a knight kneeling, sword planted before him, watching over the Emperor's beacon. No record in the Imperial archives spoke of Titan's fall. The Malleus declared it a misreading of astropathic signals, a phantom echo. The Grey Knight's name persisted, their citadel said to endure. But there were whispers among the Inquisition, that their order had transcended into something unseen, their souls bound forever to the Emperor's flame. And sometimes, in the depths of the warp, demons still scream a single name, not in fear, but in mourning: Drago, the knight who chose to damn himself so that the Imperium might remain blind to the sin that saved it.